mentions. And the funny thing is, your fans have been harassing me to death for like the last years. Wonderful people. But like, go on Joe Rogan. And I remember, like, after I had just made a Twitter account, Neil deGrasse Tyson actually helped me get on Twitter, gave me that little initial boost, and they said Joe Rogan, and so they like linked you, and I mouse over your name because I use a desktop and not mobile for this because of security reasons, and it pops up, and I get your avatar, man, and like I have to say, your logo is the worst thing in the world for people who are like trying to be like politically serious, and they're worried about the National Security Advisor condemning it, because it's like this bald guy with this maniacal grin and like the third eye on his forehead, and I'm like, oh man, that's show. that doesn't look good. But it's actually like when you watch, when you watch what you're doing, it's great stuff, man. It's great. But that first impression, like, this almost didn't happen. But everybody who has talked to you, everybody who watches your show, I think they get a very different impression than how you're painted. And for me, it's a wonderful thing because nobody understands that better than I do, right? Like, the government ran a smear campaign against me endlessly for 6 months when I came forward in June of 2013. I know we got way off topic here. I'll get back to it.
Fine. There's no such thing as off topic. We could do talk about whatever.
Great. Okay, so for those people, first off, who have no idea who the hell I am, I'm the guy who was behind the revelations of global mass surveillance in 2013. I worked for the CIA. I worked for the NSA as a contractor at the NSA, a staff officer at the CIA. I was undercover working at embassies. And I talk about the difference between this in a book and contractor and government official, and how it's all sort of lost its meaning. But I saw something wrong, and I saw basically the government was violating the law, and what I believe to be the Constitution of the United States, and more broadly human rights, for everyone in the United States and around the world. There were domestic surveillance programs, there were mass surveillance programs that worked internationally. Basically everything that they could monitor, they were monitoring. And this is actually, like, people go, well, isn't that obvious? Isn't that what they're supposed to do? And this is weird, but the answer actually is no. Under the framework of our Constitution, the government is only supposed to be monitoring people that it has an individualized, particularized suspicion of wrongdoing for, right? We think about this in the investigative means, right? Like all those TV shows where they're like, go and get a warrant. The reason they have to do that, like, we fought a revolution over this, a couple hundred years back, is the idea that when we had, kings, when we had governments of absolute power, they could simply go in your home and go, is this guy a pot smoker? Get his diary, whatever it is. And just like if you find evidence of a crime, you march them off to prison and it's all good. You found evidence, they're a criminal. Or you didn't find evidence, well, no harm, no foul. You're just doing what government does. We were trying to build a better system where, yes, the government has extraordinary capabilities, but it only uses them where they're necessary, right? Where they're proportionate to the threat that is presented by this person. We shouldn't be afraid of the person who's got like a baggie of weed in their dresser or something like that. That is not a threat to national security. That is not a threat to public safety. But what happened in the wake of 9/11 was a whole bunch of government officials got together behind closed doors, and this was actually led, interestingly enough, by the Vice President of the United States, Cheney. Everybody remembers that name, or hopefully can look that name up, Dick Cheney, and his personal attorney, sort of the Giuliani of Dick Cheney, a guy named David Addington. And this lawyer, David Addington, wrote a secret legal interpretation that no one else was allowed to see. It was kept in the vice president's safe at the White House. They weren't giving this, even when they told people, and it was just a couple people in Congress. Nancy Pelosi was one of them, and a couple of these other folks. When they talked to the heads of the agency, the NSA and the CIA and the FBI and all this stuff, they told them, the White House and the Office of Legal Counsel and, the president's attorneys, all of these guys had decided this would be legal to do. But we can't tell you why. We can't show you the legal authorization for it. You just got to take our word for it. And so they did this, and this became a mass surveillance program called Stellar Wind, which they said was supposed to monitor the phone calls and internet communications, emails, and things like that of everybody in the United States and around the world who they could get access to for links to Al-Qaeda. Because if you remember, in the wake of the September 11th attacks, they were saying, we thought there could be sleeper cells of Al-Qaeda that were just, peppered all throughout the country, and they were going to spring up at any moment. Of course, like weapons of mass destruction, it just didn't exist. It was all a power grab. But on that basis, they started doing this in secret, and it was completely unconstitutional. It was completely illegal, even under the very loose requirements of the Patriot Act. But they did it for so long that they got comfortable with it, and they thought, this is a really powerful capability. What if we started using this for stuff that was other than terrorism? Because it wasn't finding any terrorists, because there weren't any terrorists in this context that they were looking for them. And the ones who, where there were terrorists, the program wasn't affected, because these were guys in Pakistan that weren't using, email and phone calls. They were getting on a, moped with their cousin, who was a courier, who was bringing a letter to his guy, who runs the food stand or whatever. But bit by bit over time, this grew and grew and grew, and there were scandals, and if you want to drill down on these later, I'll go into them. But what happened was, step by step by step, our constitutional rights were changed. And we weren't allowed to know it. We were never granted a vote on it. And even the many members of Congress, right, 535 in the United States, they were prohibited from knowing this. And instead, they told only a few select people. In the original case, there were only 8 members of Congress, called the Gang of 8, who knew about this. Then there were